complicated, of course. Good. Let's dive into the topic, strategic M and mid-sized companies. Why are we even talking about this? We see today, by talking to procurement organizations daily, from all kinds of different industries and also different countries, of course, that there's challenges which are reshaping procurement functions today. There's changes happening. We are maybe not only focusing anymore on cost reduction and risk management, which is of course the traditional thing which procurement organizations are looking at. When it comes to key indicators, we are seeing that the world changing also brings new challenges in the last, I would say, decade probably, where we see that areas around or topics like transparency and traceability are more and more important. We see legislations driving this. These legislations are as well on national as well as on regional level, EU level, for instance. A lot of new regulations have popped up in the recent years. Then, of course, we also see, of course, driven by things like starting with COVID, but also the last geopolitical changes and, of course, also political changes in certain countries very recently, of course, require procurement organizations to more work towards resilience in their supply chains, be prepared for things which might happen, be prepared for certain scenarios, find alternatives. And then, of course, we see a third focus area where things are changing, and that is that procurement is more and more involved also in innovation, finding innovations in the supply chain, having an impact, of course, also on product development, because they are sitting basically, or they are the focal point to a huge knowledge hub, their entire suppliers and supply chain simply. How do you see about that, Fabian? Do you agree with us?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to disagree with these developments, but what for me, that's basically saying there was a very operational and tactical focus in the past. So that's what procurement is known for, has been known for, and hopefully to some degree will be known for in the future. But people are layering on top new tasks and challenges. And I think especially the transparency and traceability one, if you're in a company that now has to do that for the first time, that's an awful lot of work, and that really binds some resources. I think the supply chain resilience part, since COVID is, even people outside of procurement, I think even if I would ask my parents, what do you know about supply chains, they would come up with that one, and about being important. And then innovation is one of my favorite words, because it's the one that is least tangible. What is innovation? And innovation to whom? And so therefore, that's the one where I have been discussing that for 15 years, and I'm still not satisfied with the answer. But what I find most interesting about this picture is like the traditional role is slightly grayed out here, or like in a darker color, because what I've observed also is that people become more and less willing to associate themselves with those pieces. Like, people don't want to talk about cost reduction and savings anymore. They don't want to really talk about, hey, I make sure that the risks are in check. And I just always think, why? There's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, those are that's our license to operate in procurement. And so therefore, even though there's more and more tasks coming our way, I would still very strongly support saying, yep, we're also the savings guys, we're also the risk guys. There's nothing wrong with that.
Good. And of course, that is nothing which will ever be replaced. I mean, that's one of the things procurement is about. I was just recently last week on a procurement event where also a lot of managers within procurement have actually, I talked to them and they actually confirm, I mean, still, of course, cost reduction, risk management is what they're measured upon. However,
and maybe just, sorry for interrupting, but you introduced yourself earlier as being responsible for sales, and as a procurement professional, sales, that's the dirty word, right? So, and we just should continue to see sales as the dirty stuff and not so much the cost savings. Like, I'm very proud of that stuff, and that's really fun. So But that's a good analogy.
That's a good analogy. Let's take that discussion after the webinar, I guess. We can go more in depth.
After 5 years, yeah.
Amazing. Good. What we, of course, see is that these challenges, this is something, of course, which maybe also bigger enterprise companies have dealt with rather earlier than also mid-sized companies, but more and more. For instance, driven by legislations, for instance, the Due Diligence Act in the EU also shows it that more and more smaller companies are taking into responsibility here. And this is, of course, particularly for mid-sized and smaller companies, also a much bigger challenge then to suddenly comply with such a legislation which is coming upon them, which is not only the legislation itself, but it's of course also their customers, which are often in the B2B size, then also bigger companies, in the B2B market, bigger companies, enterprise companies, taking them into responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And I've observed, I was also at an event last week, CPO roundtable, and people were showing what they were doing in the ESG space and how they dealt with the regulations. And one of the biggest takeaways or pain points was this taxonomy problem that they now have to declare. And everybody was saying, we went a little bit overboard, and that really binds our resources. And so again, keeping us away from other things that we would like to do.
What we of course see also talking to procurement professionals every day, really, and several different companies every day, is that we're often still talking to companies which are on one side faced by this challenge, of course, but on the other side, they're still having to meet these challenges with tooling internally, which is maybe not up to par to really give them the data and the tools they need to efficiently answer these new challenges, in particular the legislations, of course. We are mainly talking to companies which are very often still using some kind of manual type of supplier data management, which can, of course, look like this, Excel tables and self-built systems.
Mm. And I mean, that works if you're a small company to some degree, because, you know, like you can, do it for yourself. You can do it quickly, but you obviously miss out on a lot of the comprehensive views that you can generate as the wider team, and make sure that you connect some of these data points. So that's why it's funny that even in large enterprises, a lot of people are still doing it manually. But yeah, they're really missing out with this performance piece there.
Good. Well, we promised you that we would also ask you some questions. One of them we would like to ask you right now. Seeing this slide now, it's like just to get a feeling of how far we are in this audience. Like what tool are you using to manage supplier evaluations? I believe the poll is online now, and you should be able to answer. I see people are already answering. Great. And what I can see is that what almost always happens when we ask these questions in our webinars, we are having a mix of answers. Of course, most companies or most participants in this audience right now are still using Excel, Word, email, notes. We have some which have already a dedicated software, 13% to be precise. Some have a homegrown solution. But if I go over to the next slide, then it's quite interesting to see. So the result of people which have Excel, Word, and email in this audience is exactly 75%, 76% now. And what we see in our long-term statistics about exactly this question is that again and again, we are ending up at a very, very clear result. It's like that 72% of procurement teams are still managing suppliers with Excel or homegrown solutions. In the audience, it's even slightly more. That is the situation as it is today, which is, of course, not a bad thing. I mean, I have seen also, it's always a size of a company and the supply chain thing question, of course. I've seen, of course, teams successfully managing a certain amount of suppliers easily with Excel tables. This works. But if you understand that, or if you are growing, or if you're having a bigger supply chain, and then also you have to answer all these legislations, then sometimes this become a challenge. And of course, that's also where we see a trend that more and more people are going and looking for SRM systems.
But before we move on to this next slide now, maybe, like, I think one of the things that is really interesting to me is that literally 0% are saying that they're using the legacy solutions or the more standard suite solutions. And again, it could be that companies just don't have that because of the size in this market segment now. But again, from observation of some of those tools, there's also some of them don't even have proper capabilities to do that. So even if you have an SAP Ariba implemented, for example, like, they might just not offer the capability to do now proper supplier evaluations. And I think that is something that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But once you start to realize that, and this result is just now giving me a little bit more ammunition for that's quite shocking. And so that's why also a lot of the big companies and a lot of the enterprises, they don't do it in a solution, because the solutions they have might actually just not offer it. So that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, we see this very often. I mean, like, when we're talking about legacy solutions, then we're of course looking into the slide right now, talking mainly about S2P offerings normally, which basically say they can do everything. We see this quite often, that they can do everything, but they're of course not specialized in particular functionalities within the entire process, which then can lead, of course, to the situation that is not sufficient for particular questions. And we see that particularly within the field of compliance management and also risk management, of course. Historically, SRM has always been one step in this process, and of course somehow it still is, but that also changes. I show you later a process map which looks a little different, but what we see very often is that companies still think like this, that you do source a supplier, the supplier goes through the supplier relationship management by doing risk and compliance management, and then they send them further into the procure to pay process, and you start working with the supplier. And that's what SRM is about.
And it's funny because, like, this kind of sequential order, I think I've seen a million of these slides. I probably have drawn another 200 of them myself as a consultant, and it's always the same, right? Like, SRM is a step in the process, and it's really the sequential thing. You get a quote, then you decide to work with contract, get them onboarded to your system, just to be able to actually then exchange orders and invoices. But this kind of idea of it being a step in the process, to me, is a little bit funny, because when you think about it, like, all of the information get exchanged, all of the kind of different sub-process that you need to go through in order to fulfill this sequence, like, it's insane that a lot of that is just offline, because there's so much overlap between them in terms of what is needed from a supplier.
I already told you before, I mean, we like to see SRM a slightly different way, and that is shown by maybe this slide a little bit. And I mean, there's of course no particular truth in everything. Every company has to find their own infrastructure, and there isn't probably always an infrastructure which fits a particular company, the company size, the product, the industry they're in, of course. But what we see very often is that, or what we would like to see sometimes more, is that supplier relationship management is part of every step which you take with a supplier, simply. I mean, you are going and plan and strategize around your supply chain and your needs you need to fulfill. And there's, of course, a lot of category management involved in category strategies. But also here, of course, you need to, of course, cannot just take develop a category strategy without knowing or without using already existing suppliers. And this is information which is crucial in order to plan properly from the beginning. And then, of course, you need to create, you need to buy, you need to source, you need to find new suppliers, you need to qualify new suppliers, you need to negotiate contracts. All this is, of course, part. You need to onboard suppliers. This is part of supplier relationship management. And then in the end, when you are in the purchase to pay process, actively work with the supplier, you of course need to measure what they are doing. What is the output from it? And that information is, of course, in some way also again fed into your strategy process, because also suppliers and certain access to suppliers can have an impact on your category management.
I would even argue there's probably not a single process in procurement that doesn't have the supplier on the other side of the medal, because as you just outlined, all of these different processes, from spend analysis, well, we look at suppliers, we derive category strategies. Well, a lot of the strategies have to do with how I shape my supply base. My savings come from suppliers usually in one way or the other. Sourcing, you need to go out, ask for quotes from suppliers, and so on and so forth. There's literally nothing where there's no supplier involved. Sometimes it's a bit more indirect rather than direct, but give or take, like the supplier is that's the thin red line that goes throughout everything in procurement, basically. So I find that quite fascinating, especially if you then think about how, let's say, how fragmented our approach to them is, and how we are trying to get for our internal stakeholders an end-to-end process. But if you think about the suppliers, like that can feel like absolute piecework when engaging with us as a company, because the left hand often doesn't know what the right hand does. And I think that's frustrating on the one hand side, but it's also a real challenge because, well, first of all, that potentially gives them an opportunity to, well, divide us in the worst case scenario, but it also means that, well, it's just more cumbersome for them to deal with us. And I think that's just as bad.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see this often also when I talk to companies, that's one of the challenges they have, that the different parts within procurement, operational and the strategic part, need to somehow have a platform to actually communicate. Yeah. And I mean, this is exactly when you look at the graph, which we have in the moment in front of us, what supplier relationship management can actually do if it's working properly and if it's integrated in the whole process.
And you just mentioned strategic procurement and operational procurement, and then at the stakeholders, like the millions of people there that also all send messages to them or treat them in one way or the other, which again, like it can feel extremely disconnected. And now that I'm a supplier myself to others, I know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah, exactly. Great. I mean, based on this explanation which we have given now, how we see supplier relationship management embedded into the whole process from source to pay, we like also to define, of course, what SRM even is. And in order to do that, we always explain this with our SRM pyramid, because of course, when you look into this process, we mentioned it, there's different focuses throughout the process, right? There can be operational questions, it can be tactical questions, and of course, it can be strategic questions when it comes to planning and long-term category management and strategies, of course. So, and that's, of course, also what a good strategic SRM system should, in that case, deliver. And therefore, we are always saying, of course, first of all, you need to, of course, clean or have a good process for your operational supplier relationship management. You need to have a proper information management system in place where the documentation and communication is gathered centrally in order to do a decent supplier discovery and onboarding. And for many people, this is already all what supplier relationship management is about. But we see more and more that if organizations and procurement organizations develop, they of course also have needs within the tactical and strategic area over time. And tactical is, of course, then if you have all my suppliers onboarded and I have measured my suppliers against my own compliance and qualification criteria, then I can also then I get to know my suppliers. I know where my suppliers are, which are more or less risk exposed for myself, and then I can make a data-based choice of which suppliers I want to work with, which ones I might want to phase out, and which ones I need more of, and which ones I need less of. And then, of course, on top of that, by also measuring supplier performance and adding this to the mix and looking at the supplier in a really 360 view, like in a holistic picture, then I really know which suppliers I want to collaborate with, which suppliers I can use to innovate with, and which suppliers will have a positive impact into my company's development, of course.
I must say, I really like the visualization, and it's something that it immediately, when I first saw it, it immediately reminded me of Maslow's needs pyramid that we want to satisfy. And it's a little bit like that, right? So you cannot do the top without having satisfied the bottom. And so I said it earlier about the cost savings and the risk management, like that being more the core focus and the background. And in SRM, the operational part is I need to have the right information of my suppliers, and I need to qualify them potentially, because only then I can actually conduct business with them. And so that's why I think, especially in very small companies, that has been the pure focus. But I think as people mature and as people have satisfied that part and have that to some degree under control, it's only natural that what's next? What can I do as a next step? So therefore, I think this is a really cool pyramid to show what would be the logical next step for you if you want to actually mature in this space.
Great. We are, of course, again wanting to know something from you now. We would really like to understand if we can. Yes, there's the poll already. We would like to ask you the question simply: at which step in the SRM pyramid are you right now? Where do you consider it? And of course, I mean, if you are clicking strategic, that means you have already cleared the tactical and operational level. I mean, like, how far have you come? That's basically the question here. And if you could get some feedback on this would be amazing. Great. So far it's basically, we have people being on strategic, on tactical and operational. It's almost on the same level. There's a few less on strategic than on operational and tactical, simply. Good. What we see, thank you very much for the feedback. What we see very often is, or we have done, of course, also studies around this. And there's one study or one white paper which we have written together with ProcureTech, which we can also provide you if you are interested in. It's interesting to see that we have actually 26% in the audience already working on strategic level. What we see is that of these people which are already working very intense with performance management, with their suppliers, measuring the performance integrated with all the other topics, that about 56% are engaging in collaborative problem solving together with their suppliers. So this is basically the output from it, saying if I do all these operational, tactical and strategic steps and I really have all the data, then I can work collaborative together with my supplier in solving problems, in maybe finding innovations, developing products and supply chain together. And this approach is, of course, something which is tremendously important if we are coming back to our new challenges, which are reshaping the procurement right now. And there I think we have taken the circle now, where we have been talking a little bit about the what. We have been talking about the why, and I think the why is also answered by this slide now. And also, of course, we want to talk about the how, but that we do in the next step, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, for me, I'm still looking at the results, and it's quite fascinating to me that we have, like, again, almost a pyramid, but actually the operation and tactical being so close to each other. Like, because when you now think about, okay, what are these new challenges and what do we need in order to tackle them, then I would love to interview a couple of the respondents to understand more, okay, what is holding them back and what are the operational and tactical pieces that actually keep them now from becoming more strategic, and really dive into that. So very, very interesting.
Cool. Good. Where are we? We wanted to talk a little bit about the how also, but before we do that, we wanted to come a little bit with some more statistics here. We have, for instance, seen that 100% of the high-performing organizations state that supplier performance data has unlocked improvements. And I mean, we have said that already. I mean, like whatever we said right now is also proven by this study which we have done before, and that that 78% of the high performers have stated that the supplier performance data has had a high and extreme impact on supplier experiences or collaboration. So that's it. And I mean, when we are talking about high performing, then we are basically talking about the organizations which are already including performance data into their supplier relationship management in a proper manner.
And it's interesting because, I mean, like that was the first step of becoming strategic, right? So that you actually start to measure, because you cannot do anything about the relationship. You cannot identify if there's an issue. You cannot improve on that if you don't know where you stand. And so therefore, for me, this also makes perfect sense. And again, it's just about, okay, where exactly do we want to go with that? And is it, like you still start by saying, okay, first I want to improve the performance. Usually when we start talking about supplier performance, it's usually about the idea of they don't perform. And so I want to understand where are the issues, and then I want to fix the issues. But as you shown in the pyramid, the next step is innovation and collaboration. And so that's another angle that you can actually take with these evaluations, because this enables you to have the understanding of who is even ready for doing that with me, right? And so I think it's good that everybody in procurement agrees that this can be good for me, but again, considering that we have people that are still in the tactical or operational sphere, I think for them, then the first step into this direction really needs to be done. Okay, start with some questions, start measuring where you stand with them and what the problems are, and then go towards collaboration next.
Exactly. Interesting. I know, Fabian, that you are not always a big fan of of seeing it as a journey.
Once or twice.
but what we at least see that it is quite often a journey for many customers. And I mean, if you look back into the poll, it kind of shows that also, of course. I would never say that everybody has to be on strategic level and do everything perfect. I mean, in some way it is a journey. What we see very often is when we are engaging with companies, then of course they start on a very operational level, first with risk and compliance management. So they need to first sort out the basics, collect the data points, interpret the data, then they come into a more technical stage, and then over time, of course, they also integrate the strategic part, the performance management part, and then you have, of course, also the shift a little bit from where you look from savings into maybe growing top line and contributing in that sense also to your company's top line, of course.
And again, maybe just to give some perspective of why he made that statement is, for me, this is coming back to the pyramid a little bit, right? And you cannot satisfy the top without satisfying the bottom. And the problem that I have with the journey is simply that a journey starts at A and then ends in B. Whereas what we're really trying to say here is, well, we want to do this and that. So we don't want to forget that. So back to my first point, like we don't want to forget our roots, our foundations of what we're known for and what we're good at and what people value, but we just want to do more. And that's the only critique of the word journey. I do not have a better one. So that's why I'm, it's easy to critique. It's hard to make it better, but I like the slide. It's very pretty.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, now I think we have talked a lot about the what and the why, and I think we are pretty much aligned on this. We, of course, also want to give you a little bit feedback on or impact on how to do it, maybe. And of course, one of the examples is, first of all, we need to look into what type of data is even important to look at. I mean, concrete, on a more concrete level. And I expect that this is not new for you, right?
For me, it's not, but I find it again. It's a interesting picture because we rarely ask ourselves what are data points regarding suppliers, right? And so I once was lucky enough to build a data model, lucky like this, because it's quite detailed. And if you just think about what do you need in order to transact with somebody, that's like, I don't know, about 15 information that you need to put into your ERP, right? Your address, name, bank information, a couple more. But so it's pretty straightforward. But when you then start adding, let's say, the next box to it about third-party data, then you already go up to the 20s, 30s, 40s even. And then you keep going and going, and a full data model where all of the data points regarding your supplier are captured can easily have 80 to 100 or even more data points. And I think that's the part that that we usually don't think about when we have a conversation about supplier data. It sounds so simple, but once you really see all of the different areas where you want to collect something, it becomes extremely complex, especially because you're not looking for, okay, now I have this data point and that data point, and now I display them, but you're interested in what is the relationship between them? What are the patterns that I see in between some of them? How do they change over time? And so, like that's where I think it becomes really, really interesting, but also really difficult if you try to do that in an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly. The more complex it gets, the less it is possible to even make an overview via Excel, of course.
Especially across a team. I mean, like even if like I'm not great at Excel, I can get around, but like even if you have one person in a team who is an Excel wizard, well, that doesn't help the rest of the team, most of the time. And so therefore, like again, the absence of tech can here sometimes really be a burden.
Yeah. Tech is, of course, a good way to lead us to the next slide. We, of course, want to show you a little bit also of how Kodiak Hub is functioning. I mean, Kodiak Hub is a very strategic supplier relationship management system. That's what basically our platform is about. And it's a SaaS solution. So it's a service as a solution. We have a platform which is modular, built modular. So it can cater, of course, different organizations and also different organizations in different development stages. So you only use basically the workflows you actually need to use or want to use at a certain point in time. How it normally works is that, and I show you later 5 minutes also a little teaser on live how the platform can look like, is that what we do is basically we create one single source of truth where we collect all the supplier data in one scorecard in the end. So the supplier data is collected centrally, and then we are not talking about data points only, but also documents, also third-party data sources, and so on. So every data point a company collects about a supplier has actually also an importance in the end when we're looking at the big picture of a supplier. So what we do is we collect them, like I said, in a scorecard. What we do is we can connect third-party data sources like country risk ratings, sanction listings, financial assessments, credit ratings, media screenings. All these kind of data is basically streaming into the scorecard. I'll show you later how this looks like. And on the other side, we have, of course, then the different workflows which companies normally use. a supplier registration module, a module for onboarding and self-assessment. That means you are actually sending data requests to your supplier in order to collect data from the supplier. This data, which is the supplier providing it to you, can of course then be double checked by also carrying out audits. We see this always sending out your own eyes into the factory, which happens in different stages of the process, of course, with the supplier, not only during the onboarding, but very often also later on. That can be all kinds of compliance audits. The data is then immediately fed back into the scorecard, of course, and interpreted, and can then also create warnings and that suppliers are suddenly red lighted, meaning that they're closed for use if we can find violations. So there's a lot of automatisms involved here. And then we have, of course, the full module for performance evaluation, where we can work with hard fact data and also soft fact data, meaning we can also ask our own colleagues to give feedback about a supplier, for instance.
And Achim, just out of curiosity, because again, I'm not so close to your platform, but you said it's a modular approach. What do people usually start with when they engage with you?
I mean, like what we see very often is exactly what the supplier pyramid, the SRM pyramid shows, of course. Companies very often start with our journey with a compliance and risk management approach. And in that sense, of course, you're using the hub where the basic functionality sits. You use our scorecard. You very often use some of the risk management modules in order to have third-party data available as soon as the supplier onboards. But then also you use very often this insight module for the onboarding process. And then very often over time, when this operational part of supplier information management has been successful, then you can also add on other functionalities. For instance, the quality insurance wants to also use our audit module in order to document audit, the entire audit process, or also, of course, very often then in the end, nowadays almost every time, after a time, also everybody starts using the performance evaluation.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, of course, integratable. That means we are working with bidirectional integrations in all kinds of ERP systems, which is also something which we really encourage you, because the advantage towards an Excel table is that you can work with such a system integrated into your data management, which you're already using today, right? That is where the automatism lies, right? Yeah. Great. How this really looks like, I can show you quickly. I show you my screen now. Just a short teaser. We can always dive into this deeper. I guess we see my screen now. What you can see here now is our platform. I will not show you the entire platform, of course. I just show you the hard piece of it, where all the information flows together. And this is our supplier scorecard. You come to our supplier scorecard by choosing a supplier here in the supplier list, which is, of course, possible to filter after all kinds of filters, which you can configure yourself. What I will do now is I will choose one of my suppliers, which is called Amplexor. I click on the supplier. What I do see now is a scorecard where I have access to all information which we have collected or third-party sources have collected about this particular supplier. I can see that it is a red flag supplier because something has probably happened in some kind of audit or somewhere else, a document, a certificate have run out maybe. We see it's an approved supplier. We see it's a supplier in Sweden. We have, because of that it's in Sweden, we have then also access to the country risk rating for Sweden. It's already integrated here. We can see the different areas in the country risk rating, which is not very spectacular now because it's in Sweden. There's normally everything in the green area normally. But one can dive deeper into this, which is very interesting for an abstract risk analysis, of course. You can also see down here the sanction listing. Amplexor doesn't exist, of course, so we have manually entered Tesla here. So you have a full overview over Tesla's listings and all kind of listings, and then you can basically take a decision whether you can or want to, or whether you're allowed to, or whether you want to work with them. And then you can go, of course, dive deeper also into the individuals which are connected, into the linked companies which are connected, which also are on listings. So this is all accessible immediately in the moment the supplier is onboarded. The interesting point of the interesting part of this is that you don't have to think about it anymore after you have checked it once, because it's automized in the platform. And this is what the actual win of this is. Normally, you maybe do this once or twice a year manually. Here, you basically identify the supplier once, and then you never think about it. But because in the moment there's something wrong or something changes in the sanction listing, you get a warning. Then you can show, of course, you can show here you can show a media overview over the company, also with the adverse media. You can integrate financial ratings, which are appear in the moment the supplier is identified. Here we have a source mode finance. You can, of course, use other sources which you are using today already. You have the possibility to write some formless notes in order to communicate maybe with your colleagues via around the supplier. You leave some notes to your colleagues. You have all the supplier data here in the background, including address and contacts to the supplier. Maybe different contact people are integrated here. This is data which can be updated by the supplier themselves, of course. Also, you can prompt them and they update the data. They basically provide you with their contact people and their contact addresses and telephone numbers, whatever you want to collect, basically. So everything is accessible here in one place. And then we have talked so much about the...
Achim, we got a question that I think you could answer. That's on screen right now.
Yeah. What could be the parameters used for measuring sustainable practices? I saw it's at 71%. That's a perfect question. Thank you very much, Richard, because that's I'm going into this right now, because what I have shown you now was external data sources which are connected to the supplier, which we tap into, and you can add other ones to it. But now we are going deeper into it, and now we want to work with the supplier, and we want to collect data from the supplier, and we do this by asking questions. And we have this module here, supplier assessments, where we can send out questions to a supplier, and we measure them in sustainable practices then. This is basically the supplier qualification and the supplier qualification score. So if I click here, I see different topics. And if I click on one of these topics, I see different indicators. And these indicators we measure by asking questions to the supplier or sending an auditor into a factory, measuring certain points here. And this is then basically flowing into as indicators measured into the platform. They get different scores. All the scores together for quality management give us a quality management score. All the scores from all the other topics together with quality management give us then a sustainability score in this case, or a supplier qualification score. And the supplier qualification score is together with the performance rating, then part of the global rating. The performance rating is built in a similar manner. We have different topics. We measure in the different topics. We have different indicators. The indicators are either hard fact indicators or soft fact indicators, where we have asked our colleagues, maybe even customers, to give us feedback about the supplier. And this can then be captured here. You can, of course, also here look into certain indicators separately. That was a bad one. Let's look at this one. We can see here trends, of course, changes over time. This is very interesting on certain indicators, but all indicators together give us then a score for delivery supply chain performance. That together with all the other topics give us a overall performance rating, which then again flows into the global rating. Meaning every indicator which we are measuring, every data point which we are measuring about the supplier has in the end more or less impact on the global rating. And some questions can also trigger a flag, for instance, because they are really important questions, for instance, or they pose an extraordinary risk for us. So, and this is the automation which you are looking for. If you're measuring this in different data sources in an Excel table and another Excel table and maybe some external data sources, you have never the connection and immediate output from everything you're measuring. And that is what an SRM system can deliver you, basically. Apart from this, of course, we have not only the measurements here and the global rating, then of course you see all the assessments, audits and evaluations which have been done over the years. So you can go back in time and see how the supplier was performing last year or the supplier was doing in an audit 3 years ago. Data is not lost. Another thing which happens with Excel tables sometimes, that it's very often the state of the status quo today, but very seldom it's easy to show trends and incidents which have happened before.
A little bit back to what we discussed earlier in terms of like, okay, performance improvement is usually just focused on, okay, there's a bad supplier and I need to improve them. Whereas here, across the different dimensions, you can actually track progress and initiatives. No?
Exactly.
We have another question here that pops up.
Can we build the performance parameters based on data points relevant to our business, or is the automation adaptable? Yes, of course it is. I mean, what these indicators mean here is what we do is we have a database in the background, which we call a global attribute library. That means normal indicators which businesses are measuring, best practice, good practice indicators. We can provide you. We have them already because we see other companies using them successfully. So we can provide you with ideas. Apart from this, you can configure your entire you can build up the entire system of indicators entirely yourself. You can define new indicators. You can do the weighing yourself. That's no problem. You can also adjust them, of course, what type of suppliers you have. That means you never would measure a supplier which is delivering services in the same way than somebody for a direct material or a logistics supplier. So you want to, of course, adjust these indicator sets to the particular supplier's needs. Yeah.
Or to the category.
Or to the category, exactly. Or maybe even to the region or to the country. That is exactly what you would do.
All right. So I think we now spent the last 7-8 minutes on the demo. I think the idea was for us to talk more about the why and how, but this really gives a good overview and summarizes a lot of the points of the operational, tactical, and strategic part that can be delivered. Let's maybe use the next 5 minutes before we have time for another 2 or 3 questions on, okay, how do we get there? Like, what is it that is actually needed in order to make that transition?
Yeah, and I think that is also already our last slide, I think. So how do we become a strategic within SRM as a mid-sized company?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, when we talked about this beforehand, this acknowledge your challenges, I always find it sounds so simple, it sounds so stupid, but it's a little bit like going to any self-help group. You need to start acknowledging that you have a problem and that you want to do better before anything happens, right? So like we saw that some people said, hey, we're already strategic. And so it's obviously for them to start, I have a problem, might be a bit more difficult than for somebody who's actually saying, I know that I'm an operation, like stuck in the operational part as of now. And so I think it's really about this. And again, it's just an example. It doesn't mean that they are not also potentially still on this journey. But I think this starting point of really saying, like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I cannot deal with this anymore because there's more and more coming my way. I think that's really just a starting point that you need to get over before anything can happen.
Exactly. Then maybe the one or two tips from my side, spending a lot of time with organizations which are actually implementing tools. I think it's always also important that companies decide in a participatory manner what platform they want to use, because it's very important that everybody in the company is on a journey. I think companies very often underestimate how big of a change management process this actually is to implement such a tool. It's not just having a process and putting a tool on top. It's very often also adjustments in the process, a new way of working, of course, a better way of working, but that is still a change for many people. So it's super important that very early engage with all stakeholders in the team in order to have them on the journey to implement a tool and find the right technology partner. I think most people should have something to say about this.
And you jump now a bit to number 4 already, but I think like the truth is really like that's already true for step number 1, right? Yeah. Because like we talked about quality. There's other stakeholders like in manufacturing very often that have a say in this, and so therefore this needs to be something that all of them also see as something that is valuable to them, because like we in procurement try to bring all of this together, but they individually also have similar challenges when they try to have that perspective. And I think if we bring them in and have them on board for this idea, okay, there is a better way of doing this, then to define this ambition as the next step is really a lot easier, because it's not a procurement program, right? It's not just procurement saying, hey, I want to do this and this is good for me, but this is good for the company. For everybody. And so therefore having them on board with the problem is obviously making that step a lot easier, because you can already define that team that wants to change something early on in the process, and really get their inputs as well. And I think a couple of the things that you as procurement, I very often, I'm not in charge of quality and making sure that some of these things are in place. But for those teams, like I think it will be very compelling for them to see, hey, there's a better way of doing this as well. So bringing them on board early is definitely very helpful. And then but a question like for me, like this number 3, this building a plan and making the case, what is your experience on that? Because again, from my perspective, I see that people very often struggle to put like that value into a business case and develop that. Whereas, if pain and heartache would have a value, then that business case would be very easy usually. But what is your experience of how people convince their organization to do that?
I mean, like, I'm sometimes very surprised if you ask companies which are in the process of buying a tool and you ask them, why do you actually buy a tool? I mean, like, what do you actually want to achieve? They are very often, they're pain experts because they know where their pain is. Yeah. But they have very seldom a real clear understanding of what the output could be if they would actually improve upon that pain points. And then I think it's not only about efficiency and savings. That is, of course, everything. Everybody talks about that. Everybody wants to hear it. But there's a lot of more values which you can actually achieve with implementing a decent SRM tool, for instance, on a strategic level, on a tactical level, which also can have a major impact on your supply chain management. I think as we have discussed now in the last hour very much. And I think procurement organizations should also, in their business plans, already talk more about these issues, not only about cost savings and efficiency.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, again, like you're a tech provider. I help people find tech providers. So therefore, we're a bit working on the same thing, just from a different perspective. I think for me, this is the part where, like, again, I have done a lot of RFIs and RFPs on, like, give me some information about you. Let's do some demos. But all of that, at the end of the day, if you just look at the tech, that's a relatively boring exercise, because the differences are very often marginal. So I think finding the right technology partner is like getting the right partner in our personal life. I mean, like, you want to get married hopefully once, but like that decision process is very considerate, but it has to do more with soft factors than just with like something that you can judge from the outside. And so I think for me, the most interesting part about this this journey, especially if you're in a mid-sized company where, you know, like this might be a bigger topic for you, is to really get a bit under the skin also of the people and deal with the people, because they are the ones that have to help you bring this to life and actually bring that case that you made before to life. And so therefore, for me, this is the part that is very often ignored if you look at it from a pure, you know, numbers perspective. And so therefore, really engaging with people is here super, super helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Engaging with the people themselves, spending some time, taking the time you need. I shouldn't say that as a sales guy, but take the time you need to find the right partner and not rush into something. I talk again and again with companies which have done that, and it's never a successful outcome, or seldom a successful outcome. And then of course talk to reference customers. I mean, like, they have already spent a lot of time with a company. They know them, not only the technology, but also how they deal as a company with problem solving. This is often very, very valuable. Good. Should we have a look into some of the questions? I think, let me see here whether there's some more questions which we haven't answered yet. There's one question about e-sourcing module. What the relations can be made. You're laughing because, of course, apropos finding the right partner, we are definitely not the company where the strongest suit is within e-sourcing. There is, of course, companies which can do this much better. You can do RFI processes on a strategic level, of course, with our tool, in order to qualify yourself the right suppliers for certain products and processes. But I mean, when it comes to really price overviews and stuff like that, I'm sure there's different partners, and we are working with some of these companies together very often in an integrated manner then in the end.
Yeah, but the reason why I was laughing is that is my background and where I come from, and so I just love that.
Yeah. Amazing. Good. I think I cannot see any more questions. Also, we have been
right on time.
Exactly an hour as planned. Amazing. Thank you very much, Fabian. I hope that was not the last time. I enjoyed it very much with you to discuss this topic. And I can see already that we have a lot of more topics to talk about.
We also, if you're interested in knowing more about Kodiak Hub and getting a customized demo and knowing more about our solution, please click on the book a demo CTA button down to your left.
Yeah. So it's always possible to just book an hour, half an hour with us. We can dive into the solution very deep. We can also dive, of course, into your personal business cases very deeply and discuss them one-to-one. Everybody's welcome. Just click book a demo and they're getting in touch with me or somebody else in the organization at any time, no problem.
And make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, because again, obviously this is a very one-directional conversation, but if you want to have other conversations, then feel free to reach out at any time.
Great. Then I thank you very, very much for your interest today. Now you can also download the presentation slides here, and I hope we will meet again in our next webinar. Bye-bye.